welcome to episode 21 of the Daily Geeky Pastimes podcast. If you want to catch us live, I record at 9 a.m. every weekday, BST, so British time, UK time. But you can also catch the VOD as soon as it finishes, and it's available as audio on things like Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, all of the normal podcast places. So we're going to be talking mostly about Jedi Survivor today. I am going to do like a full review of the game. I'm going to do it first in a non-spoilery way, so I'm just going to kind of talk generally about it without giving anything away. Then after that, I'll give you all a warning, but then I'll do kind of a very spoilery review of it. So I'll tell you when to stop listening or stop watching if you don't want anything spoiled for you about the game. But we've got a few other different things to talk about today as well. A few little like news stories or things that have happened. In terms of what I've been playing lately, obviously Jedi Survivor, but I also finished Dead Island 2. Decided not to do a full review of it just because I don't think I've got anything massively interesting to say about that game. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed playing through Dead Island 2. I ended up playing through the entire game co-op with my wife from beginning to end. And we had a good time. I would say, like a lot of games, and like I'm going to talk about with Jedi Survivor, it was too long. Like, there's too much in it. And when I say that, I don't mean like, oh, you know, I just want games to be like 4 hours long. I more mean like, when you think of the amount of content a game has, Dead Island 2 uses up all of its content, uses up all of its like enemy types and new abilities and new ideas and kind of new environments, really. And then it goes on for another like 5 or 10 hours. And that kind of sucks. Like, that's what I mean when I'm talking about games being too long, is when they just run out of things to say or do, and then they keep on going a lot longer. That was kind of my problem with John Wick 4 when I was thinking of how long that was like, John Wick 4 was a very long film. And I feel like nearly every fight could have been cut down to like 30 seconds, and it would have been more impactful. It would have shown you like the interesting idea they had for each of those fights, but kept the film moving along really quickly. So you could have ended up with like an hour and a half long film with the same story, the same action sequences, but just not repeating everything over and over again. And I definitely feel like that with Dead Island 2, that it could have been cut down quite a lot. So they could have got rid of a lot of the more sort of fillery type story quests. There's a lot of kind of running backs and forwards for no real reason. You don't even get fast travel until quite far into the game. And yeah, like there's a lot of time where you're just running backs and forwards. And it's entertaining at first. But then like, you know, when you find like the big hulky zombies, and then like it's kind of exciting the first time you fight one, and then you fight one again and again and again and again. And then the same thing happens like, you know, with all of the other zombie types. That sort of like the first time you fight them, it's kind of exciting, and then you just keep on fighting them again and again. And occasionally it does something interesting where it's like it throws a combination of the special zombie types at you, and that's kind of entertaining. But more often than not, it's just kind of repeating the same ideas. And it's like so loads of the puzzles are just like, oh, you need to try and find a way to clear out this fire, or you need to try and find a way to clear out this acid or this electricity. And it's always the same thing. It's like some games can be very, very long, but constantly kind of surprise you with kind of new ideas or new places. So like, you know, games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Skyrim, like famously long games, still constantly have something new, some kind of new hook. And then you have games that are kind of more social based, like World of Warcraft and stuff, and Final Fantasy 14, where obviously they go on for a long time. But that's because, you know, while you're doing it, you're constantly talking to people and you're having a laugh and you're meeting new people. And there's kind of a reason to do it like that. With a game like Dead Island, I just felt like I enjoyed it very much, but the last kind of, I would say like at least 5 hours of it were a bit more of a slog. I just kind of wanted to push through and get it done. Because there was even a point where it came up and said like, hey, you've killed every type of zombie. And that was quite a few hours before we finished the game. And it's like, that kind of sucks, you know, to have a thing up being like, there's nothing new anymore. And obviously it would have been disappointing if there was nothing new anyway. But being told it was like the game makers, surely the game makers realized when I did playthroughs, they're like, hey, there's this point of the game where we're kind of acknowledging that nothing else is going to happen. There's no more weapon rarities. There's no more enemy types. Nothing really happens. And then the game carries on. There is like, you know, there's a story to it that you can explore, and I'm sure some people will enjoy the twists and turns there. I didn't think it was, you know, that interesting. I don't think the story was ever meant to be that interesting. There's some funny characters and stuff like that, but they're all kind of front loaded. Like all of the most interesting characters are at the beginning of the game, and then it kind of the weaker ones are towards the end. And I do often wonder why that happens with games. Like, why is the beginning of the games? Why is the beginning of games so much better than the end of games in most situations? Not every game's like that, but most games, I would say, the first 10 hours is way, way better than the rest of it. And like part of that might be novelty and like, you know, just discovering a new game. Although I've noticed it with a lot of games that even when you replay the games are a lot better. So I'm thinking, like Dead Space, like even with the remake, or Jedi Fallen Order, actually. Like the beginning of those games is super good, and then it kind of gets into a routine and it's not as interesting after that. I do wonder whether it's like, do developers, and I don't know this, I'd have to ask someone. Do you think many developers think about it and like focus more of their time on the beginning of the game because that's the bit that more people are likely to play? I remember seeing some statistic ages ago, and I don't know how true it is now because this was years and years and years ago, where it was like, on average, like it was something stupid, like 11% of people who play games actually finish them. And like that's, if you think that's the average, there's a lot of games where the percentage who finish are a lot lower. And that kind of really interests me. It must be strange being a developer if you're working on like a long game, especially knowing that the last couple of sort of sequences that you're creating, the vast majority of people will never see. Like that's kind of an interesting sort of idea. And it makes you think like, well, what's the point of spending loads of time on those? What's the point of spending loads of effort and money on something that very few players are ever going to really see or experience? I always think that a little bit with Call of Duty and Easter eggs and the zombies Easter eggs even, that like people sometimes moan in the zombies community that like the end part of the Easter eggs often isn't that good, and like when there's a cutscene, there's a few of them that have been good, but lots of them haven't been, and it's like, but think of the tiny percentage of Call of Duty players that actually play zombies, then think of the small percentage of zombies players that can do the Easter eggs, and then think of the small percentage of them that will do the Easter eggs all the way to the end. You've got like such a small fraction of people. Like I would hazard a guess that there's plenty of Easter eggs, zombies Easter eggs, like the main Easter eggs in the maps, that there's like thousands of people have done, and it doesn't get to tens of thousands, compared to millions of people playing the game. I bet it's like a rounding error, the number of people who actually have seen the end of those things. Other than maybe, watching them on like Noah J's videos and stuff like that. I'm sure there's a lot more people who have experienced them like that. But yeah, so Dead Island 2, like I said, nothing super interesting to say about the game itself. It's very much like you'll know whether you're going to enjoy it or not. Like if you liked Dead Island 1, Dead Island 2 is better, I would say. It's better. Like the gore simulation is incredible, like where when you hit zombies, if you're hitting them with a bludgeoning weapon or something, you're actually like knock parts of their flesh off and expose a bone and stuff like that. If you're using a slicing weapon, you'll like cut them open, and sometimes you'll like chop off a limb and you'll see like bits of it hanging down and stuff. When you use acid on them, it like burns their clothes off and then their skin. It's just like, it's insane. It's like quite disgusting, but it's not, the graphics aren't good enough for it to be unsettling as such. It's just kind of like, whoa, like the impact of the weapons is quite satisfying a lot of the time with that. Even if a lot of the time the zombies take an insane number of hits to take down, unless you've got a super powerful weapon. But that like technology, which apparently is kind of, they had started building that before they knew they were making a Dead Island game, which makes a lot of sense. But that was IGN did a really cool article, by the way, about the making of that game. If you want to read it, it's worth checking out on IGN. But yeah, it's that sort of that side of it is really cool. Like messing around in co-op is a lot of fun. There's some fun moves and stuff like that. I think the environments are fun, like exploring the environments. Again, especially in the first half of the game, there's a lot of cool places you go to, like people's houses and stuff, and you can kind of explore and get a sense of who they were and stuff. That's very cool. It just all trails off towards the second half, which, is fair enough. If you were up for buying it and playing it and just enjoying it for 10 hours and then putting it down, I think you'd have an amazing time with Dead Island 2. If you want to slog through and get all the way to the end, you'll probably get bored of it before you finish. But, maybe you're not like me, or maybe I've got a short attention span for these things. So, other news, we have Redfall coming out tomorrow. That's the kind of big game release for this week. That's coming out May 2nd, which is Tuesday, so that's tomorrow. It's going to be out on Game Pass, so it's going to be out on Xbox and PC Game Pass. And I think it's also coming out on Steam as well. So you're going to be able to play it on any of those spaces, not on PlayStation, sadly, or on Switch. I played Redfall a little bit a few weeks ago. I got invited down to London. I had a good time with it. I only got to play single player. I didn't get to play any co-op or anything like that. I thought it was a lot of fun, possibly quite similar to Dead Island in a lot of ways. You know, you're in an open world. You're going around fighting enemies in different ways. You pick up like weapons that have like number scores and rarities that make them better, and some of them have special effects and stuff like that. Redfall's kind of hook is that you're fighting humans and zombies, not zombies. I kept calling them zombies at the event. I was literally talking to the developers of the game and being like, oh, do the zombies like react to a day or night cycle? And I had to keep correcting myself. I looked like a right idiot. Anyway, there's humans and there's vampires. It's because there's so many zombie games, probably. And like the vampires, you have to fight in a different way. Like you have to stake them through the heart to kill them, or use an elemental attack like fire or electricity to kill them. The players you play as all have like their own special abilities, a bit like Borderlands. You know, they've all got like a lot of them have. I was about to say all of them have a movement ability, but that's not really true. Some of them have a movement ability. They all have different ones. I did a video about all of the different abilities and everything. I will definitely be doing some streaming of it tomorrow, probably tomorrow afternoon, evening, and then I might be. I'll be doing some videos and stuff like that. There'll be some Redfall content this week for sure. I've actually got a sponsored thing coming up for it, which will be exciting. So that's all very, very cool. I've got a Call of Duty thing as well this week, which I'm quite excited about. Not a sponsored thing. I'm not getting paid for it, but I'm quite looking forward to that. So I think that's happening tomorrow as well. But yeah, Redfall, looking forward to it. We'll definitely play it. Also this week, we've got the Call of Duty World Series of Warzone qualifiers. And this is a really interesting thing. This is happening Wednesday and Thursday. World Series of Warzone is a super interesting thing. The people who are involved in it, obviously, it's one of the biggest things. You know, it's one of the biggest things on the calendar. It's a competition where lots of streamers get invited to be a part of it. And then there's also open qualifiers. So normal people, well, I say normal people can take part of it. The tactical Brit was working out what people were having to do in the qualifiers in order to get qualified. And it was like, you had to play 10 games in this playlist they'd set up. And I think you had to have like an average of like 15 kills per person and get in the top 5 in all 10 games. Like, that's better than any of my games. I never get like 15 kills. I think 15 kills is the most I ever got in Warzone 1. But yeah, so people who are insanely good at the game could qualify. 50 teams qualified from EU, 50 teams qualified from NA as well. And then they do the qualifiers, the next round of qualifiers on Wednesday and Thursday, I think. I'm not really sure how that works, but I'm assuming they're custom games. And then they'll pick like the best people from each of them to go up against the streamers and content creators. And then there'll be a final at some point in the future. I don't even know what day the final is. I'm guessing this weekend. But yeah, the reason I find this kind of interesting is that Warzone is huge. Warzone's one of the biggest games. And if people will have you believe it, esports is huge. Like, esports is a massive deal and people care deeply about it. This is like the esports version of Warzone, which to me would be a super exciting thing. Like, I feel like I'd be excited about watching it. But I don't even know when it's happening. I don't really know what like the format is or anything like that. Oh, there we go. The regional finals, the EU finals are on. Oh, they're not for ages. They're on the 17th and 18th of May. What? They're like 2 weeks on Wednesday and Thursday. That's ridiculous. But anyway, so they're not for 2 weeks apparently for some bizarre reason. But yeah, I suppose they have to set everything up for it. Do they fly people out? I don't know how it all works. But anyway, yeah, I find it strange that like it should be a big deal, and I don't really know much about it. I'm willing to bet that most people who play Warzone have no idea it's even happening, just aren't aware of it. Like, and I know they have advertising in game, they'll have the splash screen up, but they've done the thing with the advertising in game, particularly with the screens when you load up the game and something like pops up, that I think most people are trained to ignore those. Like most people, you know, when you have something flash up on a website, a screen pops up, and you just assume it's like a cookies thing or something, or it's an advert, so you close it immediately. If you're watching a video and something pops up, you just ignore it because you think it's an advert. And in video games now, they've started training people by putting stuff up about bundles that people don't really care about. They've made people like not care about the things that flash up. So it's almost like a reaction that when I load into Warzone and a screen pops up at the beginning, I'll just tap whatever the button is to get rid of that screen and carry on. and I don't read it. I don't like internalize it at all. I'm not paying the slightest bit of attention to whatever that screen said. And I think that's a really stupid thing to do. Like, I think if you want to have a system where you can tell players about things that matter, you need to save it for things that matter. You need to use it very sparingly. So when it does pop up, it's kind of a surprise. If they wanted people to pay attention to World Series of Warzone, what I would do personally is, you know, that little loading animation that plays when you start up? Why not have it there? So when you start a game of Warzone, it comes up with something saying like World Series of Warzone happening on such and such a date. Watch it here live. That would be a bigger deal. Let people watch it in the game rather than, you know, like this is something Defense of the Ancients 2 did, Dota 2 did, where in the launcher for the game, you can actually watch the tournaments and stuff like that. They actually do a really cool thing where I think you can watch the tournaments in Dota and you can actually like do it as the spectate mode in the game, so you can like move around the map and look at what you want to and follow the player that you want to and stuff. Like that would be amazing. I know Warzone can't do that, but imagine how cool it would be if in the World Series of Warzone you could load up your version of the game and then do it as like spectate mode, so you're just spectating your favorite player. Obviously with a delay, you know, you'd want to have some sort of delay so there's no cheating or anything. But imagine if you were just spectating, you know, the person you wanted to follow. So you didn't have to rely on the streams and stuff like that, which can be weird quality and there's adverts getting away. But you could just keep on hopping through them. Like, that would be awesome. And like, each player could see in the top right how many people are spectating them. And it'd be like, you know, normally it's like 4 or something, but it could go up to like 10,000 people are spectating you. That would be super cool. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but I would like it. But yeah, so World Series of Warzone happening. Let me know in the comments. Are you excited about it? Do you know about it? Like, did you know this was happening? As a sort of fairly, you know, clued up audience who like Warzone and stuff, are you aware of World Series of Warzone? I was having this, like, I was listening to someone talking about this the other day, and I was kind of having this conversation that I don't think many people care about the competitive scene of Call of Duty. Like, I would say it's a small minority of people who play Call of Duty who are even really aware of what the competitive side of Call of Duty is, let alone actually being engaged with it. Like, I think it was when I was talking to Jaff the other day, I was streaming some of the new plunder mode, and I was sort of talking to Jaff for one of the games. And he was saying about sort of like, you know, oh, things that they do for competitive and why they should make competitive separate and stuff like that. And I was just trying to make the point that I don't think many people care about competitive. I think people, obviously people who take part in it do, and I think there's like a healthy community of people that love watching tournaments and love watching CDL and love watching World Series of Warzone. But I think that number of people is quite small. I don't think it penetrates much into normal people. Like, just anecdotally, my friends who are just like people, normal people who play Call of Duty, don't know anything about it. Like, they're not aware of any kind of tournaments going on. They won't be aware of World Series of Warzone. They won't be aware of CDL or any of the teams in CDL or anything like that. And, you know, they are people who are into games, who play Call of Duty a lot, and they have like no awareness that anything like that's happening. They'll know, like, if you said, oh, do you know there is competitive Call of Duty? They'd be like, yeah. But then it's like, that would probably be all they could tell you. Like, they wouldn't know anything else about it. I really don't think it penetrates that much. When I was a teacher, and like sometimes the kids would talk to me after lessons about video games and stuff they're playing, they would often talk about Call of Duty. And I never once heard any of them talk about the competitive scene at all. Like, you know, they were aware of the idea that some people make a lot of money playing Call of Duty. But that was like about it. They didn't have like, you know, a favorite player or a favorite team or anything like that. They knew streamers, like they knew content creators. They'd, you know, be able to reel off, you know, I remember some kid coming in excited because he'd heard that I'd played with Noah J, and he was like, oh my God, that's incredible. They know that side of things, but I just don't think competitive Call of Duty is as big of a deal as some people maybe think it is. And like, obviously Call of Duty want it to be big. Like, they want to establish this thing. They're pumping tons of money into things like CDL and World Series of Warzone to make it a big thing. And I just don't think it's caught on, personally. Like, maybe just not yet. Maybe it will. Maybe it will get better. But, you know, you look at the things like some games like Counter-Strike, I would say it's almost like, you know, to me at least, from as an outsider, it seems like a massive part of that is the competitive scene. Same with League of Legends and Dota 2 and StarCraft 2. These are games, and Street Fighter. These are games that are almost known for the competitive scene above everything else. Whereas Call of Duty, I think it's a footnote. I don't think there's that many of people take it seriously. It was really interesting where when I was having that conversation with Jaff was saying about Blackout, and I was saying like, oh yeah, you know, one of the things Blackout was fun. They didn't care about the competitive scene, and Jaff was like, what? The competitive scene was huge. Like, you know, there was loads of tournament stuff. And like I said, I literally like I played Blackout. I would say nearly every day for the whole first year that it was out, and I played it a bit further beyond that. We played tons of it. I had done nearly all of the special challenges within it, you know, where you unlock the skins. I think I might have done all of them. I'm not sure. You know, we'd played hundreds, thousands of hours of that probably. I literally didn't know there was a single tournament in Blackout. Like, never heard of it. And, you know, I'm someone, back then I wasn't a content creator, but I'm still someone who, like, follows gaming news and stuff like that, and was not aware of it at all. I think it's just one of those things, like the zombies community, I think very similar to the zombies community, where within that community, things seem like a big deal because there's lots of people doing a very good job of promotion within the community, but it just doesn't penetrate outside of that bubble very much. And I think, you know, that's probably a problem. I think that's why zombies has had so much less attention paid on it, like over the last, you know, couple of years at least. But arguably for, you know, since Black Ops 4, really. Because I just don't think there's that many people that play it, and there's not that many people that talk about it. And I think the competitive stuff is the same. And like, when you look at CDL, and like people can say, oh, well, you know, like they do with zombies, people are like, oh, well, look at Noah J's like viewership numbers. Like that shows you how big zombies is, or Codename Pizza's viewership numbers. So that shows you how many people want to watch zombies, but not how many people want to play it. And even then, it's still a small number compared to like other things. It's just that, you know, whereas say if you wanted to watch a game of Warzone, you've got literally like a million creators to choose from to watch the content. If you want to watch like zombies content, you've got like, you know, from people that people have heard of, probably like 5 outside of the zombies community. You know, if I asked a lot of Call of Duty players, name me 5 zombies YouTubers, I think people would be like, Noah J, Mr. Waffle Waffles, maybe Codename Pizza, JC Backfire. Then they might struggle. Like, you know, I know more. Like, I know people because I've played with them, but I think like it's very small. And I think with CDL, they can point at their viewer numbers and be like, hey, look how many people watched World Series of Warzone. Look how many people watched the CDL finals. But that's because they do drops, and drops always artificially inflate like the number of people watching. You know, you can watch a stream that has drops. I've streamed with drops on for some Ubisoft games and had like an insane number of people watching. I think when I was streaming Super People, I had like 3,000 people watching, and like the chat was no more active than this chat is now, because nearly everyone was there just to get drops. Like that's all they cared about, was getting drops. They're not there really to watch the content or engage in it in any way. They just they heard that there's a new skin that they can get. And for what it's worth, I find competitive Call of Duty quite hard to watch. Like, as someone that knows a lot about Call of Duty, has played a lot of all of the different modes of Call of Duty, I still find it a hard game to watch. Whereas, like, you know, you can watch StarCraft or Dota or League of Legends or Street Fighter or something like that, and on the screen, you can basically always see what's going on across the entire game. Like, you know, you can just at a glance get a sense of who's winning, what position everyone's in, like how well everyone's doing. There's a lot of information available to you. With something like Call of Duty, when they're constantly switching between people's viewpoints and the objectives, you know, especially when it's something like domination, I find it quite hard to get a decent sense of what's going on in the game and what's interesting in the game. I think that's why with CDL, I much prefer it when I play Search and Destroy and stuff like that, because then at least you get a better sense of what's happening, because each player only dies once. You know, that makes it a lot easier. And with World Series of Warzone, that works a little bit better. Although in the first half of it, you might as well not watch the match for the first half of World Series of Warzone, because it's like the cameraman's constantly trying to jump around. Imagine trying to juggle like 150 different viewpoints and trying to work out where the action is. And they're always like a little bit too late to the most exciting things that happen. It just doesn't really work out. And then once you get into like the last 10 teams, then it starts getting interesting, because then you've got a sense of where each team is, which teams know about each other, how geared up they are, and all of that sort of stuff. Like, it gets a lot more interesting at the very end. But for the rest of it, it is not great, maybe. Just quickly going through some of the chat. Just go back to Dead Island. Silent Giant said Dead Island 2 was better than Dying Light 2, but you think zombies as genre is getting old. I mean, I would say that, yeah, I thought Dead Island 2 was better than Dying Light 2. I would agree with that. I think Dying Light 2 had the same problem of becoming repetitive but Dying Light 2 became repetitive way earlier on because, all of the buildings are basically the same that you're exploring. All of the streets seem the same. It's just like there's very little variety in anything you do in Dying Light 2. The movement felt cool and the combat felt cool, but it's everything about it is just got so repetitive, which I really didn't like. It's also interesting. People who have played both those games, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's some very specific mechanics and story beats that are essentially the same in both those games, which is a bit weird. Charlie said the only thing you like about competitive COD are the CDL skins you can buy. Yeah, the CDL skins are nice, for sure. Silent Giant said based purely off the sketchy nature of the servers day today, mostly looking forward to the highlights. It'll be interesting to see what they're doing with the servers and stuff. Like, I do wonder, we've got obviously a big patch coming out in 2 weeks just before World Series of Warzone happens, because it'll be the Season 3 Reloaded update around, May 15th kind of time. I do wonder if they will do, like, something significant for that. I actually wonder if they'll bring that forward, because if they've got World Series of Warzone happening on that Wednesday, because it's like Wednesday 18th or something, I wonder if they'll do the Season 3 Reloaded update a week early just to avoid it, so they don't have a massive update that changes game balance and stuff like that the day they're doing a big tournament, because that would be kind of weird. But yeah, I hadn't really thought of that, actually. But yeah, they do need to fix the server problems. Me and my friends played Battle Royale for the first time in Season 3 the other night. I think it was like Saturday night. And it was rough. Like, I think we played 5 games on Al Mazrah. And the first game we didn't do very well. Oh, well, I say that. I think we came like 3rd or 2nd or something. But then we had 3 games. Yeah, so I think we came 3rd. And then 3 games in a row where the server crashed. Like 3 games with the server crashing. And then the last game we won. But yeah, 3 games. The server crashes are super bad at the moment. And then Rob Berry said you're aware World Series of Warzone exists, but you don't understand what it is or what it's for. Yeah, I think loads of people are like that. I know about CDL, but only because I get the free calling cards. Yeah, like this is what I'm talking about. Like, us are all people who are quite clued into the Call of Duty scene, and we're not really aware of the competitive side of it. Again, lots of people do love it. Didn't Fortnite have a tournament on patch day once? I don't know, maybe. Have they said anything else about the servers? No, I'm sure they are working on it as best they can, but there must be something serious going on because it's been super bad. Like, it really sucked. Don't forget to like the stream, by the way, if you're watching. It does help me out a bunch. Right, and then we've got 2 more little news things before I start talking about Jedi Survivor. The Armored Core 6 trailer is out. I'll put this up on the screen, I think. This is kind of interesting. But Armored Core 6 is a game that normally I wouldn't care about that much. It's, it's a Japanese mech game. There's a million of these sorts of games. It's one of those ones where you're a little bit faster. It's not like Mech Warrior, where you're sort of like slow and lumbering. It's much more like Vanquish and things like that, where you're sliding around. It's the 6th in a series. I had never played an Armored Core game before. I don't think I've ever met someone who ever said that they liked it or anything like that. When people were super excited that Armored Core 6 were coming out, I did go look at the Metacritic scores for all of the other Armored Core games, and they haven't ever done very well. Like, they've never been games that people have really loved. But the big thing that obviously gets people excited about this is that it's From Software. And From Software, since they were last doing Armored Core games, they've now been making Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Sekiro, Bloodborne, some of the best games of the last 10 years. So they're making a new game. People are going to be excited. Now, they have already said specifically that, this isn't going to be like Dark Souls or anything like that, although there is a sort of vaguely Dark Souls-y vibe with some of this footage, I think. It looks like there's quite big open things and, like, difficult enemies that you have to use all your abilities to get around. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some inspiration. Sorry, don't know if I'm going to sneeze or something. But yeah, it looks really interesting. It looks very cool. It looks fun. The graphics look kind of bad, admittedly. But the actual gameplay looks fun, and it looks like there's some really different styles of mech you can use. There's one flying around a jetpack. There's one that's got tank treads. It looks very, very fast, which I think, this is, again, something we'll probably come back to in Jedi Survivor. The idea of a game not going too all out on the graphics because it wants it to run well, it wants it to play well, is, music to my ears. That's what I would love to see from gaming. And this, looks like that's what it's doing. That it's going to try and have good performance in exchange for maybe kind of crap graphics. Which, again, is quite a common thing in Japanese games, I think, where they don't tend to push the boat out in terms of having the best graphics ever. But then they tend to have, really solid, tight gameplay that, rewards you really thinking about the animations and stuff like that in a way that a lot of games don't because they've got unstable frame rates. So yeah, I'm excited about this. I'll give it a go. I don't know if we have a release date for this yet, but it definitely looks like something that before this trailer I wasn't interested in it at all. Now with this trailer, I'm kind of excited about it, to be honest. So yeah, that's Armored Core 6. Oh, it does have a date. It says on there, this is on the official Bandai Namco website, August 25th. So always nice to have a game in August. It feels like games hardly ever release that. I don't know if it's just because it's so hot and I assume everyone's outside and having fun, but games don't seem to ever like launch in August. So nice to have a game then, even if it's at the end of August. So that will be cool. And then finally, this isn't really gaming news, this is more me news. I am not going to be here for the podcast on Thursday or Friday this week, so it's just going to be free podcast this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's because we're going to Sweden to go to Liseberg, which is a theme park in Gothenburg. It's very cool. They've got a brand new hotel there, so we're going to go try that out. It's a place we've been to a couple of times before and always had an awesome time. So I'm really looking forward to that. Go on some roller coasters. They've got a scare maze there that are open all year round. They've got some like cool little flat rides and stuff, and it's just nice being in Sweden. It's a nice place to visit. So excited about that, but it does mean no podcast Thursday or Friday. So now we're going to get on to Jedi Survivor, and I'm going to talk for the first part of this in very general, non-spoilery terms, because I have finished the game. I finished it last night. Played through the whole thing on stream. And yeah, I've got thoughts. I've got lots of thoughts. I've got lots of notes, for them. When I always talk about like, oh, you shouldn't tell the developers what to do or anything like that, I don't want people to misconstrue what I'm going to say as like, oh, before I get onto that, stop that thought, forget it. I did want to clear up a couple of things talking about developers. When I did that interview last week that I got in a little bit of trouble with from Call of Duty for doing that interview with a developer without going through their PR team and everything like that, so that probably won't happen again. But I did speak to the developer afterwards, and a couple of clarifications to make. First of all, there's not only 2 people working on the DMZ missions. There's 2 people who are the main people for working on the DMZ missions, and then other people have kind of come and helped out and done stuff on it, like on and off, depending on demand. Because obviously, there's not always demand to make loads of missions. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. So there's like 2 main people overseeing the DMZ missions, and then sometimes there's a bunch of people working on it, sometimes there's not. So he didn't want to sort of act as if he was taking credit for all of the missions when actually a load of other developers have worked on them. So yeah, there are more than just 2 people working on DMZ missions, to make that very clear. The other thing is, the stuff he was saying was not teasing anything for the future of the game, wasn't teasing anything that's coming in the future of DMZ. He was just talking about the things that he wants to see and the things that he cares about a bit more. That's like a very different thing. So I think some people came away from that being like, oh, well, he's hinting that this I saw some people already being like, oh my god, it's going to be awesome. DMZ is going to have like a big base and stuff. And it's like, he specifically said, and I left it in the video, he specifically said that he was talking about extraction shooters as a genre, that, the idea of having a big base would be very cool in an extraction shooter, not necessarily DMZ. So yeah, don't sort of read too much more into that. He did thank me for not like misconstruing anything he said, so I think I did a fairly good job of sort of just expressing what he wanted to say. But those 2 things needed clarification. So yeah, hopefully that's done. Anyway, thanks for subscribing, Angel. So yeah, Jedi Survivor, non-spoilery. Let's start with the most obvious thing, the thing that people have been talking about, and the thing that I'm ever so slightly in a sort of conspiracy mode of, which again, I don't normally like being like that about games, being like, oh, there's some secret agenda in it. I don't think that's ever true. But there's a little bit of that with this. So the big thing that people are talking about with Jedi Survivor is it got really good reviews, like loads of 9s out of 10s, 8 out of 10s, all over the place. And then when it came out, people were like, the performance is bad. And I would agree that the performance is bad. Like, I'm running on a 3080. My CPU is a Ryzen 9 5900X. I've got a 32 gigabytes of RAM, all of that stuff. I've got a pretty good PC, like a pretty high-end PC. Not top of the top, but pretty good. When I was playing this, in the first area, the first world that you go to, I was getting about 55 frames a second, down to 50 sometimes, on, like, that was at 1440p, everything on Epic, and with ray tracing on. And like that sounds pretty good, but it's like I really wanted it to be smooth. I want it to be at least a solid 60 frames a second, because it was like you could feel the judder, you could feel the stutter a little bit, and that was kind of annoying. So I tried turning ray tracing off, and that put it like didn't change it at all. It kept it exactly the same, 55 frames a second. Then I tried turning ray tracing back on. That dropped it down to 45 frames a second, because there's a weird bug in the PC version where if you turn ray tracing off then on again, it suddenly costs a lot more frames for some reason. So you have to restart the entire game to get them back. But yes, then I went back into the game. I tried lowering the resolution to 1080p. I tried turning loads of settings down, or like way down, and couldn't change it from about 55 frames a second, which really sucked. And like some areas in the game end up at about 45 frames a second, some at about 55. Then there's some places, like the second location you go to, seem to run a bit better. There are some times in the game when I was getting like 60 frames a second, like generally, or maybe even a little bit higher. But it was pretty terrible all the way through for that kind of setup, for like that kind of PC. And considering the game looks good, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, but it looks good, but it doesn't look like incredibly good. You know, it's not like something like Last of Us 2 or Red Dead Redemption 2 or those sort of things that kind of take your breath away. There's some cool designs and stuff like that, but I didn't think it was that technically like amazing. But it was just running not very well. And then I at first was trying to think, okay, have I got any drivers that are out of date? Is there something else I can change? Is it some part of my computer that's causing a bottleneck? And then I saw a Digital Foundry thing that they were running one of the new Intel like 13th generation processors, or 14th or whatever. And they had a 4090, and they had the exact same frame rate as me. Like, it didn't make any difference. And it's because the game isn't using it all. The game, for most of the game was just using like 30% of my CPU and like 60% of my GPU. It's like the performance thing was really, really low. Weirdly, when it got to the end of the game, my GPU was suddenly running at 100%. The game wasn't running any better. It was actually running worse, but now the GPU was running at 100% and was getting quite hot, which is very, very, you know, when I say quite hot, it's like 77 degrees. Not crazy for a 3080, but it was still hotter than it was at the beginning. So something changed, but it didn't make the game run any better. It just made my GPU use a lot more power. But yeah, it was a very disappointing situation that, like, the performance is bad. And apparently, I haven't played it on console. Apparently on console, the performance mode is a mess where, like, it says that, you know, it's meant to be 60 frames a second at 1440p or something, but it's not. It's like the frame rate constantly drops down to like the 40s. And it's apparently the frame rate's so unstable, it's really hard to play, and it makes it look really bad. Or you can run it on the quality mode, which locks it at 30, well, locks it, but sets it to 30 frames a second, limits it to that, and runs at 4K, which apparently looks quite nice, but still drops down to like 20 frames a second in some sections. Which for a game like this, where it's a lot about quick movement and quick fighting and reacting and stuff like that, just isn't very good. Like, it really does kind of spoil the experience of the game a lot of the time. There was a few fights in the game, not many, but I'd say a few fights in the game where it was stuttering enough that it made it like unfun to play that because of the stuttering. But anyway, so the performance is definitely a problem, and it seems like there's a few people who have got slightly older hardware where it runs quite well on it, like, which is slightly strange. You know, there's like slightly worse hardware seems to be running it quite well. But I don't think anyone's having like a perfect experience. People aren't running this at like, you know, 120 frames per second with everything turned up, which is a kind of a shame for a game like this. But anyway, so that's a problem, and that's a thing that's happened. And now, because that's the whole news story, I think we're getting into the same sort of thing that we had with Cyberpunk when it first came out. That people were like, oh, this game would be amazing. It's just all of these bugs. It just needed more time. And I don't think that was ever true for Cyberpunk. I don't think Cyberpunk was ever a good game, personally. Like, I didn't like the story of Cyberpunk. I didn't like the sort of way you leveled stuff up, and it didn't really matter. Like, the fact that the hacking was so unbelievably shallow, the combat wasn't very interesting. Like, the characters, a lot of the characters weren't very interesting. Like, the city was very dead, you know, you didn't have, like, civilians really going about their day. They would just be, like, wandering around completely mindlessly. There was no police or anything like that. There was very few like systems that would make the city seem alive. You know, stuff that you take for granted, like, you know, you play Grand Theft Auto, and like you hurt someone and an ambulance will turn up. You start a fire and a fire engine will turn up. You commit crimes and the police will chase you and turn up. Sometimes the police will turn up and see someone else committing a crime and they will have an interaction. there's like all of these different layers of just things that are happening. You know, you go to the beach, you will see people doing beach stuff. You go to like a food district, you'll see people eating food. Like all of that stuff you sort of take for granted in GTA, which is a game that came out on the Xbox 360, GTA 5. And then you play something like Cyberpunk and it's like the whole world just feels dead. Like it's nothing going on. And I think that really sucked. Like that was really, like I genuinely thought Cyberpunk was a bad game. And then it also had the bugs and everything. But lots of people were like, oh no, the game would be amazing if it wasn't for the bugs. It sort of shifted the conversation away from the game, the quality of the game, to just talk about the bugs. And that's quite good for the publisher because then, and for the developers, because then you can tell people that'll get fixed. You know, a bad game, when a bad game releases, it's very rare that a bad game releases and then they improve it to the point where the game is now good. Like, you know, there's some people, you know, Final Fantasy 14 managed to do it by literally shutting the game down and starting it up again. Like, people would argue that's what happened with No Man's Sky, although I quite like No Man's Sky at launch, but I know some people didn't. Lots of people didn't. But yeah, like it's very rare that that happens, that a game is bad and then they just make improvements to it post-launch and make it good, especially with like an RPG. But that's what, like with Cyberpunk, if you're just saying like, oh, it's just bugs and stuff, people are like, oh, well, the bugs will get fixed, they'll be patched, and then the game will be good. And I think that's what's happening with this a little bit, that with Jedi Survivor, people are talking about the performance and everything like that. But it's like, I think that's almost a distraction, that's the easy target for like, that's the obvious thing that's wrong with it. But I think actually, once more people finish the game, once more people get a bit far in, because obviously I've been playing it for like 10 hours a day. It was like, I think it was about 25 hours it took me to finish it, maybe 20. And it, yeah, 20 hours, I think. And it took me like that long to play. And it's like, I'm sure lots of people haven't quite got there yet. But this is a bit like what I was saying with Dead Island 2, where the first 10 hours of this game are pretty good. And then it gets worse and worse and worse to the point where I would say about 10 hours into the game, I would have said it was like maybe even an 8 out of 10. I was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Like, I'm enjoying this. I'm having a good time. And then about 15 hours into the game, I was like, maybe it's more like a 7 out of 10. Like, there's actually quite a lot of problems. And I'll talk about those problems in a bit. And then by the end of the game, I was like, this is like a 6 out of 10. This is kind of actually maybe even worse. It feels rude to say 6 out of 10 because obviously loads of parts of the game are very high quality and obviously lots of care and attention's gone into it. But there's some things about the game that drag it down so much that it kind of makes me think like I didn't like this game at all. Like that I would rather have not played this game, which, you know, might have even put it down below a 6 for me. So we'll talk about some of the good things first, because in that first 10 hours, there are definitely some good things. Oh, sorry, Robert Very just said, do you think they're controlling the critical narrative with technical annoyances? I don't know. When I talk about a conspiracy thing, I don't think there's necessarily, I don't think like they created technical problems in order to hide the fact that the game isn't very good in either Cyberpunk or Jedi. I don't think that's what happened. But I do think they might be being quite vocal and talking about the technical problems. You know, both of them released statements very early, like on all their social media, saying like, we're not happy with performance, like this is a problem. Just trying to, control the narrative a bit and trying to be like, hey, the problems with this game, you know, when you see these bad reviews on like the Metacritic user reviews or the Steam user reviews, those bad reviews are because of performance. Like, nothing to see here. It'll all get fixed. Don't worry. I think there's a bit of that going on, that like they're definitely trying to focus as much as they can on the technical side because that's something that people expect to get better, rather than like maybe some of the reviews are other people that have finished the game like me and didn't like it. Anyway, so yeah, we'll talk about the good things. We'll talk about the good bits there. Lipscomb just said Star Wars Jedi Survivor UK physical sales are 35% lower than what Fallen Order managed. But surely that's because physical sales are just worse. Surely that's because people don't buy physical games as much. Like, a lot of physical game shops have stopped. Like, a lot of supermarkets don't do good deals on games like they used to. People just buy games digitally now, don't they? I think, like, a much higher percentage of people buy it digitally. So I wouldn't look too much into physical sales being lower. I don't think that'll end up mattering that much. But anyway, yeah. So, good things about the game. Positive things. For the first part of the game, I would say the combat feels pretty good. Like, you know, lots have been made about the fact that you can now chop enemies' limbs off. I would say that's like, comparing that to like say Dead Island 2 that I was talking about, it's nothing like that. It doesn't make it more satisfying or anything like that. It makes a little bit more sense. If anything, it makes the game feel a bit more brutal. Maybe not in necessarily a good way. But yeah, it's definitely the lightsaber feels a little bit more like you sort of are breaking through people's defenses, and then it's like super lethal and super dangerous. And there's a lot more you can do with the lightsaber now. There's a lot more different moves and things like that. Combat in general feels a bit more aggressive. Like it's a bit more like, okay, you have to parry quite quickly, and then you have to get an attack before the enemy resets and starts fighting, depending on the difficulty you're playing. I kept jumping between, I was playing Jedi Master for most of it. Then some bosses I dropped it down when I got stuck. I did that quite like maybe like 3 or 4 bosses. I dropped it down a bit, and then I played through the last part of the game just on the normal difficulty because I was getting fed up by then. But it's and by the last part of the game, I mean like the last hour of it, maybe last half an hour of it. But yeah, like the combat feels a lot more sort of aggressive and snappy than Jedi Fallen Order did, I would say, in a good way. And some of the new things you can do with the lightsabers, which again, I'll talk a bit more about in the spoilery section of it, but some of the new stuff, the new abilities and things like that do feel pretty cool and look pretty cool. I'll try and stick to positives, but yeah, that only really applies for the first 10 hours, I think. That doesn't stay for very long. It is, the combat is still, while I say it's snappier, it is still very similar to the first one. Like, it's not a big departure. It's not like you're going from like Dark Souls to Sekiro. It's not like that kind of jump. It's much more like, hey, if you like the stuff from the first one, they've done that and they've made it a little bit tighter, a little bit faster, a little bit more responsive, and that looks better. The environments, again, for the first 10 hours, look pretty stunning. Like, there's some really cool looking environments. The first 2 areas you're in, the first 2 locations you go to, look very, very cool. And there's actually like some variation within them. So even when you're on the same planet, you'll go to like different areas and they'll look quite different. Some areas look better than others, but they do quite a good job of having like that whole, again, going back to Dark Souls kind of having like a vista, and you will see somewhere a long way away, and that will be a location later on. And you're like, okay, at some point I'm going to go over there. And sometimes it won't happen for like 10 hours. You won't go over to that other place, but eventually you will. Eventually, when you see those cool places, you will be able to go there. And that's kind of fun. And yeah, being able to like look over these amazing places does look very, very cool. And there's a few like entertaining characters. Again, in the first 10 hours, you get introduced to some quite cool characters. There's some quite funny characters, I think. There's some funny little lines. There's a few little like references to things here and there, to like other bits of Star Wars, and some like different takes on like species of characters and stuff like that, which I always think that's one of Star Wars' strengths, is the different locations and the different characters and the different alien species and stuff, and like seeing different vehicles and all of that sort of stuff. All of that stuff is fun. Like all of that stuff, when you're finding new ones especially, where they're given a bit more free reign to be more creative, I think that's fun. I think that's something that the prequel trilogy did really well with films, whereas like, you'll see, and the original trilogy as well, because everything was new then. The fact that you were seeing things that like, you'd see a new ship, or you'd see a new species, or you'd see a new planet, and it was always like, oh, cool, this is like something quite different. And then, you get to learn about it. That kind of world building stuff is cool. And there's a bit of that in here, especially with alien species. Not so much with ships and stuff like that. And sometimes it's funny. Like sometimes some of the writing is funny. Again, more in the first half of it, the first like 5-10 hours, there's some quite funny writing. That kind of disappears as it goes on, and it gets much, much less funny, at least less intentionally funny as it goes on. So then we can talk about the bad. One of the problems, and I would say maybe the biggest problem for me that might not be a problem for you, and something that might completely change your experience of this, is that this very much feels like more Fallen Order. Like, this game, more than most sequels I've played, just feels like more of the same. It's not like Mass Effect, where they're massively broadening the scope and the stakes and everything, and like turning everything up to 11. It's not like Red Dead Redemption 2, where it's kind of really coming out with like the what they wanted to do with the first one, but they were held back by technology and stuff. Red Dead Redemption 2, they managed to properly do it. It's not like Last of Us 2, where they really kind of matured and the story writing got so much better, and like the gameplay, like the combat got so much better. and they just kind of like refined everything there. This is very much like, it could almost be an expansion to the first one. Like, it's so similar to it in terms of gameplay, and in terms of like even, you know, the story to an extent. But it's like, it's just more of the same. So if you enjoyed Fallen Order, there's a decent chance you're going to enjoy this. Although, saying that, I enjoyed Fallen Order, but I did think Fallen Order was too long already. Like, there was too much stuff in it without changing stuff up. There was too many sections where you were just climbing through an area, too many sections where you're just like balancing on a pole, or you're fighting through 10 enemies that are exactly the same as the 10 enemies you fought in the previous room. Like, that game already had loads of bloat, it had loads of filler. Jedi Survivor is just more of that. It's just like doubling down on it, being like, hey, you like that game? We're just going to give you another 20 hours of that same game. And as someone that was already kind of bored of it the first time round, you know, because I recently played through Fallen Order just before this came out to get excited about it. And I was, when I first started playing Fallen Order, I was like, on my second try, I was like, oh, this is really cool. This is quite exciting. Like, I'd forgotten how good this was. And then, like, after about 5-10 hours of it, I was like, oh, this game's entirely too long. Like, this game goes on forever and stops being interesting quite a long time ago. And it's just like doing that, getting bored of that, and then going into Survivor, where it's like, yeah, this is still that game. Like, this is still the boring part of that game. And it has cool moments. It has a couple of cool cutscenes, a couple of cool, like, set piece moments, but literally just like a couple of really cool set piece moments. It doesn't have enough. There's just so much filler in this game, like just insane amounts, where like loads of the game and the story and the gameplay is like, hey, you need to go over here and get this thing, or go see this person. And then to get there, you have to do a load of traversal, do a load of wall running, a load of climbing, a load of jumping, a load of fighting the same enemies again and again and again. And then maybe on the route, they'll give you one new item, one new ability, which is just like a new thing you tie into your chain of like wall running, jumping, blah, blah, blah. And then you'll go get the thing or meet the person or not get the thing or whatever happens. And then it'll be like, okay, now go back. And sometimes it'll let you just fast travel back. Sometimes, especially at the beginning, you have to kind of then do a lot of that running and jumping and stuff kind of in reverse, but normally through a slightly quicker route. And then you'll get back and sort of like, okay, good, we did that. And then I'll be like, okay, now you need to go get another thing or do another thing. And like all of this happens basically like there's two main locations where you're just bouncing between them constantly. And you're like, okay, now go there. And there you're going to go get a thing. And so you go to another location, slightly different scenery and stuff. But now you're like running on walls, jumping, swinging, doing all of that, fighting the same enemies again. And then you'll get a thing, and then you'll come back and do it. And it's like the same mission structure over and over and over again. And they change things up a tiny bit, like a couple of times. But the vast majority of it is very much like, go get this thing, and you have to traverse a way to get there. And it's basically the same wall running, climbing, finding. A lot of the time you'll get stuck in a room and you'll be like, oh, I don't know where to go here. And it'll turn out there's like a little crack, and you just have to shimmy your way through it every time. And they don't do anything interesting with that formula. There's no, like, I would say there's no real, like, gameplay innovations that change up what you're doing in the game, ever. Like, in the entire game, there's no point where you're like, oh, okay, cool, like, this is kind of what I was doing, but now, like, this has thrown a fun twist into it. It's just more of the same, sometimes with an extra button thrown in. And it's like, and it always does the thing of, like, I complained about this while I was watching the stream, that it is intensely gamified. Like, and this, I've talked about this before, and people have thought I sounded like an idiot, and I'm probably going to sound like an idiot again, because I find it hard to explain. But some video games are very much video games. And what I mean by that is, you know, you play Mario or Sonic, and you don't care that in Sonic you're jumping on TVs and getting rings out of them. In Mario, you don't care that you're climbing up a flagpole and getting a golden star for doing it. Like, it doesn't matter, because it's just like, you know, you're playing a video game that has rules and has rewards, and you just kind of accept all of that tying together, don't you? Like, it's just a thing. You just, like, in video game mode, it's like, what do I do to get the points? You're not immersed at all. Like, you're not thinking about immersion or anything like that. I don't think people get immersed in Sonic the Hedgehog. Instead, they're just sort of like having fun, going through the motions, and the mechanics of it are fun, and the rules of it are fun. And then you get other games where it's more about immersion, and it's more about, like, they try to hide those gamified aspects. So it's like, okay, still, if you think about it enough, you're fighting enemies, you're getting objects, but you're sort of going through and you're doing something interesting. And they make all of those little things, like getting new powers and stuff, feel somehow immersive, feel like somehow it makes sense within the game world. And Jedi Survivor, I think, in terms of its story and its presentation and its settings and everything like that, feels like it's trying to be the latter type of the game. Feels like it's trying to be serious and immersive and, feel like a real world, have real actors playing the characters and all of that sort of stuff. But the gameplay feels so much like the first type. It feels so much like you're playing Mario or Sonic or something. When you're running around and you're finding identical boxes hidden in ancient temples, but there's like Imperial crates that you can hack open, and inside the boxes you find a beard, like a new choice of beard to put on, or when you're plowing through this area and you find a new ability for BD1, or you find a new ability for yourself, and then from then on, every single route you need to go down requires that ability. And it's like, well, it's a good thing we got that ability, because if we didn't get that ability, we would be dead. Like, we just wouldn't be able to progress at all. It just feels very silly. Like, it just feels like it's the gamified version of this, where you just accept that, like, oh, okay, now I've got this ability to jump twice in the air. All of the wall running things are slightly further apart now, where they would have been completely impossible before, but now it's fine because now I can do this extra thing. And there's no in-game explanation for why that's the way it is. It's just like, oh, this is a video game, you've got a new power, so now we're going to make you use it over and over and over again. But even though it's all gamified, and that in itself might be an okay thing, like that might be a fine thing in itself, they then don't double down on that. They don't do stuff like Metroid. I think, like, I've heard people compare the levels of Fallen Order to Metroidvanias. Metroid does a really interesting thing where it gives you the abilities, and that then opens up the map a bit more because you can get to new places, which this does. But then Metroid also finds interesting ways to use those abilities. So then you'll come up against enemies that are weaker if now you've got these new abilities, or you'll come up against bosses where the most efficient way to kill them is to make complete use of these new abilities. And this game doesn't do that. Like, you get things like you have a grappling hook, and the grappling hook you can only use in very specific locations. You can never use it in combat or anything like that, even if it would be useful. Like, when enemies are holding shields, it'd be cool if you could, like, grapple them away. You have force pull, I guess, so it maybe doesn't need to be done. But it feels like, maybe that would have been cool. And there's a bunch of abilities throughout the game where it's like, hey, this would have been a cool thing to be able to also use in combat, but you can't really, and, like, you're not encouraged to the point where even some things, they change, like, what the buttons do depending on whether you're in combat or you're not in combat, and whether you're fighting alongside someone or you're not fighting alongside someone. So it, like, takes some abilities away from you. And it just seems like that's kind of irritating. That's kind of a bit frustrating. So it's like, it's gamified in a way that breaks the immersion completely, but it's also gamified in a way that's not massively interesting. It doesn't do anything interesting with the stuff it gives you, which is a real shame. And yet there's other things not to like about this game, I think. Like, the character development is non-existent. I'll talk a bit more about that in the spoilery mode part of this, but I don't think there's any. I've read a couple of threads and reviews last night where people are like, oh my god, the characters are amazing and the journeys they go on are absolutely insane. In my mind, the characters are exactly the same at the beginning and the end of the story. Like, the story might as well have not have happened. Like, there's no growth, there's no development, there's no change, there's no kind of them learning something or them overcoming something. It's just a whole massive story of chase the MacGuffin, and nothing ends up really mattering at all. It's like, by the end of it, I didn't care about any of the characters. I didn't care about any of the things that the game wanted me to care about. I just wanted it to end. I just wanted to stop playing. And similarly, a bit like I was saying about Dead Island 2, you get to a point a long time before the game ends where it's like, oh, you've seen everything now. You've got all of your powers. You've seen all of the enemy types. You've seen all of the different things it's going to throw on you. We're not going to do anything interesting. So, like, whereas the first 10 hours, you're constantly finding something new, you're constantly finding a new way to solve puzzles or a new way to traverse, or you're fighting new types of enemies, and there's quite a lot of different types of enemies. You're doing all of that stuff. It gets to a point where it's like, no, we're just going to do the same thing over and over again now. And there's a point where I thought the game had ended, and the game carried on for like another 5 hours of just not doing anything new for 5 hours, which, well, one thing new, I suppose. but it was, yeah, kind of tedious. So, yeah, overall, I would say I didn't like Jedi Survivor. I don't think it was a good game. I think it was a okay sequel to Fallen Order, but it didn't. I would say Fallen Order is a much better game. The combat in Fallen Order is not as good, but the environments are better, the story's better, the pacing of the game, even though Fallen Order had problems with backtracking and a bit of bloat in the middle, is still better because at least Fallen Order had a really good beginning and a really good end, and a lot of the middle was quite good fun. I thought that was a good story. It was a good fun time. This has a pretty good beginning, and then it just sort of trails off, and it never picks up again. It never gets good again, which I think is a real shame. Yeah, so I was very disappointed with it. Right, that's enough non-spoiler things because I don't want to keep being careful, and we've got to the hour point. So I am going to carry on talking for another few minutes about this, but from now on, I'm going to start spoiling everything about the game. I'm going to talk about all of the story. I'm going to talk about abilities. I'm going to talk about enemies. I'm probably going to talk about basically everything that could possibly be spoiled for this game. So if you care about having Jedi Survivor spoiled for you, if you haven't played it yet, and you're going to play it, or you're playing through it now and you don't want the end spoiled for you, please, please, please stop listening now. Just leave. I'm filling time a little bit just to give you a chance to click off this. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you tomorrow morning where we'll be talking about probably Redfall and things like that. We'll talk about something different tomorrow morning, but right now, stop listening if you don't want anything spoiled for you, because I am going to do Star Wars Jedi Survivor spoilers right now. So let's talk a bit more about what else was wrong with this game, but we can talk in a bit more detail now. So this is a game where essentially everything happens on 2 planets. This is a Star Wars game where you have a spaceship, you can travel anywhere, and they've decided that basically everything happens on 2 planets. One of which is at least kind of interesting. There's forests, there's swamps, there's caves, there's a few different places. There's a couple of big starships and stuff. There's a bit of variation. The second one is a desert. And it is just a desert. And it's everything about it is deserty. And it's just kind of, again, quite tedious. And that really sucks. And when I was saying earlier about there being it being gamified, that expands the environments as well. That as you get into the second half of the game, nearly every environment you go to, it's so video gamey, it's unreal. You literally go into puzzles. It's like the shrines in Zelda, where you just fall into rooms and it's this is just built to be a puzzle. And it's they sort of try and make out that they're Jedi trials or something. But it's this is a very silly environment. It's very silly that this would exist at all. Especially where some of the times they're using things that I don't think were meant to have existed back when the thing was created, which doesn't make any sense. And then you go through the interiors of spaceships, and there's tons of times where you're walking through a spaceship and you'll have to climb up stuff and jump and force jump through the air, and you get all of these different abilities that let you do these superhuman things to get around. And then you'll come into a room where there's a couple of stormtroopers standing around. It's how did you even get here? There's no other doors here. There's no other way for you to get here. So what, did someone just drop you off? What are you standing around for? And it's there's no logic to any of the environments. And I would say after the midpoint of the game, you don't ever come across an interesting environment again. There's no point where you see something that looks spectacular or interesting. You just go from bland environment to bland environment. All of the interesting artistic, creative areas are in the first part of the game. And then you start just going through spaceships where every corridor looks the same. It looks like an Imperial Star Destroyer. Or you go to a couple of new planets, but you don't stay there very long, and they're very small areas. And one of them is just a base on a moon, looks all the same. It's all very grey. You go to another area where it just looks like they've changed the color palette. So now everything that was green is now bright white, and everything that was green is now red. But other than that, it looks exactly the same as the planet that you spent most of the time in the game on. It's just very, very kind of bland in the second half of it. And in terms of the enemies you fight, it's I didn't even really think about this while I was playing it, but afterwards I read a thing and someone was saying about how loads of the enemies are just the same enemies that you fought from the first one. Loads of the enemies either act like the first enemies, like the monsters and the stormtroopers and stuff. You fight ATSTs again. You fight jetpack troopers. You fight flamethrower troopers. You fight those troopers that have the big cannon thing with the shield around it. You fight loads of those K2SO robots. Like, you think they've got the entire Star Wars universe to draw from, and then like 90% of the enemies that they've got that you're fighting most of the time just feel like the enemies from before. They have this new faction that are like the Raiders that they never really explain who they are. They never really explain that much about like why they're different to the others, other than the fact that the Empire fighting them. It just gives them like an extra faction. But they're all basically the same as the stormtroopers that you fight. You know, they're wearing brown clothes instead of white, but they basically act the same. They basically like fight the same. You don't have like different kinds of interactions with them. They have added like one big new beastie, like the scorpion type thing, that's quite annoying to fight because it blocks you with its claw. So you have to like find ways around that, which is fine. It's not very interesting. It's weirdly one of the easiest enemies to fight against, even though it looks quite intimidating. And then you get and then the big like new faction is the separatist droids that have got like the battle droids and stuff from the prequel trilogy and droidicas and the battle robots and stuff like that. But none of them are very interesting. Like the normal battle droids are quite fun because they just fall apart when you hit them with the lightsaber, and their voice lines are very funny. Like when I was talking earlier about the idea there are some funny voice lines, it's the battle droids. Essentially, the battle droids are the funny ones. Like they have some very funny lines a lot of the time. A couple of stormtroopers as well, and they have some little jokes and stuff that can make you laugh. Like that's quite good. But like the droidicas aren't as intimidating as they are in like the films and stuff like that. They're just like very easy to get rid of. The big battle droids are quite basic. They've made some new droid types that are super aggressive and stuff, but they're not interesting to look at. They don't have that kind of cool visual design that the films have. They're just like very gamified. It's like, oh, look, this is a big hench robot and he's got like a hammer in one hand and a rocket launcher in the other. He's going to mess you up. Or this one's got an axe in both hands. It's like that kind of thing. That's just very, very tedious, to be honest. And like all of the bosses that you fight, none of them are interesting. Like at no point do you fight a boss where it's like, oh my god, I've never fought something like this before. They're all just like, you know, a variation on either a Jedi and you're doing a lightsaber fight, and none of them fight in a kind of interesting way or do something that you haven't seen in a million games before, or they are like a monster, or they're like a bounty hunter, and that's it. And it's like, it feels like a missed opportunity that they could have had, like, you know, the Mandalorians in it or something like that. But like, nope, nothing like that. It's all very much just sort of like, okay, you've got people that fly around and shoot you and throw grenades at you, or you've got people who have lightsabers and use force abilities on you, or you've got big monsters that roll around and try to grab you and eat you. Like, that's it. Essentially, there's like three boss types, and all of them just fall into one of those. And none of the boss fights are interesting. Like, none of the boss fights have like fun gimmicks to them. Like I said, you don't use your abilities or anything like that. Lots of them do a very annoying thing where you have lots of phases to it, and if you fail in like there's a fight again. I'm spoiling everything here. This is your last chance to back out because I'm going to drop a big spoiler in a second. So shut this off right now if you don't want it to be spoiled. If you want this to be a surprise, because I'm sure for some people it will be a surprise. Okay, this is your last warning. Okay, I'm going ahead with it. There's a fight near the end where you fight Darth Vader, and when you're fighting Darth Vader, there's 4 phases to that fight, and the first 3 phases are unbelievably easy, and then the 4th phase is quite hard. And because he suddenly starts doing loads of damage and starts doing a set of attacks quite quick, where it can literally kill you in like a couple of seconds, and you don't have a chance to heal if you get caught in it. And that's really frustrating because that means every time you try it again, you get put back to the first phase. So you've got to fight through 3 phases again. You can skip the cutscenes at least, but you have to fight through 3 phases again in order to get to that 4th phase, in order to then be able to like try and beat him. That's the place where I lowered the difficulty because I was just like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not fighting through those 3 phases again and again and again and again just to try and practice at the 4th phase where his attacks change up a little bit. It would just got super tedious, and I really didn't like that. And the way Darth Vader is using this is awful compared to the first game. Like the way I'm going to put a spoiler warning up on the screen because I just realized people might come into this halfway through and then be like, oh my god, there's spoilers. So I'm going to put spoilers, and then I'm going to put the capital spoilers for Jedi Survivor. Okay, and then I'll put the color as like red. There we go. Oh no, that doesn't show up. But that doesn't show up as neatly as I thought. There we go. I'll put it there. Hopefully then if someone joins in, they'll be able to see. So they yeah, so you like the way you fight him in this, it just feels so like inorganic. It's literally like there's the Empire attacking something and everyone seems confused as to, like, how did the Empire know we're here? Like, what's going on? And then he's there just for one fight to fight a character who's barely been in the game the rest of the time because you're playing as someone else. And it's like you're doing this fight, and it's clearly just there just so he can be in the game. Just because they were like, oh, in the first game, people really liked that ending where it was like cool. And the cool thing about the first game was that you couldn't fight him. Like, there was no way to withstand him. It like made him seem like this unbelievable, unstoppable badass, like we like to think of him as being. But in this, you just fight him and you can beat him really easily, to be honest, you know, like comparatively, compared to what it should be like. And then it doesn't matter because, you know, you beat him and then it just like says like, oh, you lost actually. And it does that quite a lot in the game where there's loads of times where you get an enemy's health bar down to like 0 or down to the low part that triggers the cutscene. And then the cutscene plays and shows you losing. And it's like, but I was just winning. And it's like such a cheap way to try and raise the stakes to be like, oh, look, Cal's actually met his match. And it's like, well, no, because I was absolutely destroying this guy. Like, I just killed him without getting a hit. And now you're showing me in the cutscene, you're showing me as being the one that's like struggling. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And that happens all the time in it. Like, the boss fights are really disappointing. The boss fights are like a really kind of bad part of this, I think. And yeah, like, I saw someone after I played this, I went back and like read all the stuff I could about it, including some things that people had sent me that were like leaky type things about it. And one of them was like, oh, there's like another fight like the Darth Vader thing from the first one. And then people were like, oh, I wonder who it's going to be. Like, is it going to be like Grievous somehow? Is it going to be Maul? Is it going to be like Palpatine? Like, what's going to be? And then the person was like, no, it's him. It's Vader again. It's just the same thing again, but you know, worse. And it's like with the enemy types, like when you're fighting the Imperial stuff, you'd think they could have done some cool stuff, you know, like the ATST was like the big thing you fought in the Jedi Fallen Order. They could have upped the game there. Like, what about if you had a big fight where you're fighting against an AT-AT? Or what if you had a cool fight where you're fighting, you know, and somehow you had to do something against TIE fighters or something like that? And it's like, nope, like you do see some AT-ATs and you deal with them in the most ridiculous way possible. It's just utterly silly and makes them look terrible. And you never fight anything more scary. There's like one bit where you get to fight an ATST, and then suddenly there's a bit where it's like there's going to be 2, and you're like, oh, this could be quite a hard fight, fighting 2 ATSTs, and then someone like prevents them from even coming into the room, and you just have to do like a kind of almost scripted type thing to stop them from coming in. And it's just like stuff like that just feels like so utterly disappointing when you've got like Star Wars to draw from, like the Star Wars universe to draw from. And they just don't do anything with it. Like, they don't do anything interesting with it. And they also do that thing that a lot of Star Wars games are guilty of like in the films, you know, it's been fairly well established kind of what the Force can do and what the limits are and why someone like Luke and Anakin were so powerful and was such a big deal. And then in this game, you're like way stronger than either of them. Like, you're doing crazy stuff that like no one ever did in the films. You should be the best Jedi ever. And then at some point you get to control another Jedi and they're the best Jedi ever. And then you see a couple of other enemy Jedi and they're the best Jedi ever. It's like literally every Force user is so insanely powerful than this. And you know, like one of the random characters who's again is barely in this basically nearly kills Vader in a one-on-one fight where Vader doesn't have some disadvantage or anything like that. There's just a one-on-one fight and Vader's very nearly killed by them. And it's like, why? Like, what is it? Like, why is it that no one else knows about this Jedi? You know, in the films, no one ever mentions, oh, there's this other person who escaped a purge who's actually insanely powerful, more powerful than Luke. But, you know, we're just going to ignore that. We're just going to forget about that. It just seems crazy. And that happens all over again. And yeah, Robert Very saying, like, this is something that I was talking about last night when I was streaming it, that the, one of the other things that, like, again, this is another thing that I'm sure lots of people won't care about at all. Like, lots of people it won't matter to them. Well, I'm just going to put on a background for that text, otherwise you can't really see it. Background university. No, you can't. Can you not put a background on? No, okay, fine. One of the things that bothered me a bit about the game is that, like, you as Cal are meant to be this like Jedi hero, but you're constantly murdering people. Like, they try to make a couple of big points towards the end of the game of like you not killing people and being like, oh, look at how Cal's like really growing. Look at how Cal's being a good person and caring about stuff and like really kind of showing mercy, showing that he's a true Jedi. And it's like, but what about all the people you just killed? Like, the people who he's sparing are pretty much definitely evil, like definite evil people. And then the people he murders, he has no idea who they are. Just random stormtroopers, random like raiders, just people. A lot of the, like, it's not even like the raiders are actively raiding. At one point, he makes a big deal of talking about how this is where they live. Look, these are their yurts, and you just wander in and murder all of them. Very similar to what Anakin does when he goes and kills the Tusken Raiders. And it's kind of that shown as like an evil thing he did that set him on a path to the dark side, or at least cemented his path to the dark side. In this, Cal does the exact same thing, but not even for revenge. It's not even like he's super angry that his mum's been killed or anything like that. They're just in his way. They're just in a location that he is moving through, so he butchers them all. And he does that to animals, he does that to stormtroopers, he does that to a bunch of Imperial officers. Like a load of Imperial officers that aren't like talking, they aren't doing anything threatening, they're just minding their own business on a base, they don't even know he's there, and he just drops down and stabs them through the heart with his lightsaber. And it's like, we've established in the other Star Wars media that a lot of the stormtroopers and even the Imperial officers, you know, they were kind of either forced into service or they were idealists. They're not really evil people. They're not bad people, but just, you know, they ended up working there. And like, it's not like, oh, you see them doing evil things and then you kill them. It's just like they're standing in a room, so you kill them. Like, they are wearing that uniform, so you murder them. And this happens constantly throughout it, and it happened in Fallen Order too, and it just keeps on going. And then they make a big deal of like there's a couple of times in fights where it's like you're gonna die, and it's like it comes up with a prompt of like, embrace your dark side, and then you press it and you get more powerful for a little bit, which, like I was saying in the stream, is a lot like sort of press F to pay respects. It's like boiling something that should be complex and emotional and powerful down to literally a button prompt. It's like, embrace your dark side by clicking in your thumbsticks. And yeah, so you do that a couple of times, and then it's like, oh, is this going to be something where like Cal's going to turn evil, Cal's going to turn to the dark side? And then later a character says, hey, you need to be careful not to lose yourself. And then Cal's like, oh yeah. And then it's never mentioned again. Like, that's it. And it's like, oh, okay, that's that bit of character development. And there's Cal overcoming his dark side. It's just like, stopped. It's just like nothing happens. It's like, that's so stupid, like just utterly dumb. But yeah, it's really annoying that like that happens like that. There's like this big deal of like, oh, you get this like dark side ability where you can go through, your saber looks a bit more red and you're like slicing people up really aggressively, but it's like you've been doing that throughout the entire game. And then the whole thing is dismantled by a character. Also, the character who tells you, like, hey, you need to be careful not to lose yourself, is someone who thinks that the whole light side, dark side of the Force is nonsense. She grew up on Dathomir, you know, like Darth Maul and stuff. She's like someone who hasn't just lost like a couple of family members. She's lost her entire species, has been wiped out. They're all basically witches and demons. She was like summoning zombies and stuff like that in the last game. And then she's the one who sees Cal using the Force in an incredibly powerful way, and she's like, hey, you need to be careful about this, don't lose yourself, you know, think about your morality. It's like, you're a witch. Like, what are you on about? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And it's like, that's the big problem with the character development in general, is like, they make, like, they have some plot twists, there's like some changes in characters, but none of them are earned, none of them make sense. There's like, one of the characters just turns around and is like, hey, I'm betraying you all now, goodbye. And then, you know, that becomes like the villain for the rest of the story. And it's like, there's no reason for that to happen. There's no, like, his motive for it is nonsense. And all through the rest of the game, when they're trying to build up, you know, to make the betrayal hurt, they're trying to build him up as your friend. He's telling you loads of private information about himself and about the fact that he has this daughter that he needs to protect and that he's going to go back and make sure he gets her first. And then he betrays you and turns out that he was a spy all along and that he's actually a secret enemy Sith, and is like, all of this nonsense happens, or it's an enemy dark bad Jedi, I don't know what you'd call it. But all of that. But none of that feels like it makes any sense. Because if he was a spy all along, why would he reveal to you, the enemy, that he has a daughter that he cares about more than anything, that he's going to go back to after this is finished? Like, why would that be something he reveals at any point? And also, you see him fighting, constantly fighting for his life in like situations that could very easily kill him, and then right at the end of the game he's like pulls out a lightsaber and starts using all these crazy force abilities. It's like he wouldn't have done that at all. Like literally the first scene of Jedi Fallen Order, or the first like big scene of it, is Cal being put in a life or death situation and having to use the force, which reveals who he is. And it's kind of like this never ever happens to a character in this game. Like just doesn't happen at all. Which is nonsense. And like when you look at the characters, like from the beginning to the end, you have like Cal himself starts off as this incredibly powerful Jedi, like just insanely powerful Jedi, who literally at one point a character acknowledges how powerful he is, like, hey, you lured me to this Imperial base to destroy it, didn't you? Like he lured him to a secret Imperial sort of special services base, knowing that Cal would win against the entire base. It's like, that's how powerful Cal is. So he starts the game as this incredibly powerful Jedi that's been doing all of these crazy missions and stuff like that. And he wants to be a good person, but he doesn't really know if what he's doing is making a difference. Then at the end of the game, he's this incredibly powerful Jedi who isn't really sure about whether what he's doing is making a difference. Like, there's no growth. There's no character development. There's no change. Like, the beginning of the game, he's a bit like, you know, distant from some of his friends, but he's made new friends. And then at the end, he's kind of distant from some of his friends, but he's made new friends. And it's like, what? I mean, he adopts a kid who just murdered a bloody dad for some reason. But it just doesn't make any sense. It's like, the gameplay is so detached from the narrative. It's insane. Like, Cal is this monstrous thing. Like, I genuinely think the story would have been much better if, like, all of Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor really... I feel like if Fallen Order was about Cal trying to reconnect to his Jedi roots and meeting Sarah and all of that sort of stuff, I think that would have been quite cool. And then realizing that the Jedi weren't as powerful as he thought, and just being a Jedi isn't enough to topple the Empire because they have things like Vader. Like, that would have been a cool arc for the first one, and that's kind of what it's about. That, you know, there are all these secrets of the Jedi, and tapping into them is great and all, but it's just not enough, that the Empire is too strong. And then if the second one, like this one, Jedi Survivor, should have really been about he has to abandon the idea of what makes him a Jedi in order to survive. He has to do things that a Jedi shouldn't do. He has to, like, really kind of go, like, primal in order to get through and to complete his goals and to save the people he cares about. He has to do stuff that would make him a monster in the eyes of the Jedi, like would make him a horrible person, and kind of become more like Vader. You know, Vader became evil trying to save the people he loved. If his arc sort of mimicked Vader's a bit, of like him slowly becoming more brutal, more angry, more like willing to kill, like more of a soldier than anything else, that would have been a good, more interesting arc, I think, you know, of him slowly seeing that, like, while the Jedi have these hopes and ideals, it doesn't fit in with the universe they're in now, and he has to become more like Vader. He has to be about power and strength and stuff like that in order to do something useful, in order to make a change. But it's not. He's still just a bloody Jedi. It's still at the end of it. It's just like, yeah, I'm still just a Jedi. I'm still good, but I'm just also happen to be insanely powerful. And that sucks. Like, there's no change. And then you have, like, the pilot guy who starts off, like, when you meet him, he's sort of like, oh, I'm a bit too old for this, but, like, I'm still an incredibly good pilot. And then at the end of it, he's like, oh, I'm a bit too old for this, but I'm still an incredibly good pilot. You have Merrin, who apparently has had a ton of development in between Fallen Order and Survivor, and gone to see the galaxy and realized that, you know, Dathomir is this special place to her, but there's a lot more in the galaxy out there for her. And then, you know, she's like a little bit world weary, and she kind of loves Cal for some reason. I guess it's because she's a woman character that's about his age, so she has to fall in love with him. But yeah, and then she's at the beginning and she's like, hey, I'm going to support you, Cal, no matter what you want to do. And then at the end, she's like, hey, I'll support you no matter what you want to do. It's like nothing changes. Like, none of the characters change at all, other than these, like, preset twists that don't make any sense. And it's a real shame that like just the writing is so bad for that kind of thing. I just think like genuinely they should have. I think what happened is, okay, so this is my prediction, and again, I don't know game development, so I'm making this up, I'm speculating. I think what's happened is that they made a game. They wanted a game where you use a lightsaber and you use force powers. That was like their brief. And then they've sort of maybe made some settings. They've maybe been like, hey, it'd be cool if we had this like foresty place and then a deserty place because they kind of contrast. And then we can have this moon that's very grey. So that's like a third point of contrast. And then we don't really have to do anything more than that because we can use the same enemies on all three of them and we'll kind of make it make sense. And then they tried to wrap a story around it. And for whatever reason, like maybe Disney or whoever have said like, hey, you can't have like a new Sith or anything like that. We're not having you making a new Sith in this timeline. Like that doesn't make sense. And so they've had to try and keep him a Jedi. And they've just sort of like tried to make this story that bounces between like place to place and gives him more power. But because of that, they've kind of forgotten to have any opportunities for any kind of growth or any kind of any important character development or anything. And it's a real shame. And then, oh yeah, and there's more. I mean, there's more stuff that sucks. Like the story, like I said, is literally you spend most of the game trying to get like these items that let you get to this special planet. There's a special planet, and everyone wants to get there, and everyone wants these items. And like, I kid you not, you find 3 of these items, and every time you find one, it's like, oh, it's broken. Oh, it's broken. Oh, this one is broken, but we'll fix it, and then it gets stolen. And then they look at this bloody recording that's conveniently there from the High Republic era, and then the person's like, well, don't worry, if you don't find any of those things, there's actually this other way that you can just like get in there anyway. So those items literally didn't matter at all. So it's like you spend most of the game bouncing between 2 planets, trying to find these stupid things, and then none of it matters. Like all of it, by the end of the game, they're just like, oh yeah, none of that mattered. I don't need to worry about that at all. Like, forget about it. It's like nothing interesting happens along the way. And it's like when they do stuff like they do kill off a character, and when they kill off a character, it's very much like, you know, like, oh my God, this is the most dramatic thing ever. But they chose to kill off the character who's in it the least. Like they chose to kill off the character who's barely in this game at all and doesn't have any motivation other than, hey, I want to stay here and like gather archives. That's what I want to do. And then you get a little moment where you get to play as her and she's like insanely powerful because, of course, everyone you play as has to be insanely powerful. But it's like, but obviously it's not quite enough. And that kind of sucks. You have like 2 companions. They have this new system in where sometimes you fight alongside someone. You can kind of give them commands, but you can give them 1 command each. They can only do 1 thing each. And they both are insanely powerful. Like what a lot of the game is you having to traverse places, trying to get to places that are hard to get to. And one of them can teleport and basically fly, and the other one has rocket boots and a jetpack and can fly everywhere. So a lot of the time, you'll spend like hours trying to get somewhere really difficult, and then they'll just turn up next to you and be like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, I was just waiting for you. And it's like, why didn't you bloody carry me? Why didn't you get me here? One of them has a spaceship that he flies around and flies to places that you need to get to. And it's like, you're not doing stuff like, you're not going in and disabling anti-air defenses so he can get closer and for that. He just happens to turn up next to you and it's like, hey, I'm going to be here now. It's like, this is just nonsense. Like, this just doesn't make any sense at all. And yeah, with the, and like I would say the most interesting character in it, or the most interesting character who was in it, was Merrin, who's like the witchy person from Dathomir. And she has these cool like Nightcrawler style abilities of like bamfing in and out of existence, and she uses a dagger and she's like getting up close and has this cool fighting style and has like magic abilities and stuff like that. And like it would have been much more interesting to play as her, and you know, her trying to sort of like get revenge for what happened on Dathomir. That would have been maybe cool. But also they make her insanely powerful, where any situation that's like, oh, how are you going to get out of this one? It's like, oh, she can do some magic that fixes it. She can rewind time if she wants, like for fixing stuff. She can teleport massive distances if you need to. Does she get tired when she's doing it? Well, she says she does, but you never actually see any evidence of that. She just has a limitless supply of this magic that she can use whenever she needs to solve any problem, basically. And then they do a stupid thing of, like they said, giving her a romance plot that isn't earned at all. It's someone she's barely spent any time with at all. And just like randomly they sometimes kiss. And it's just like, oh, it's a romantic moment. And I think that's a big part of like the game. It's almost like when they did the plan, they were like, okay, we'll have romantic moment here, we'll have romantic moment here, we'll have poignant death here, we'll have betrayal here, we'll have poignant death here. And it's like, before they did that, they didn't actually know who was going to be the romantic moments or who was going to be the poignant deaths. And they just sort of slotted characters in, like one of those, those things where like you have a paragraph and you have to fill in the words and it's like, oh, isn't it Mad Libs? It's like that kind of thing. And it's like, none of it feels like it fits or like it's earned. It's just very boring. But anyway, so all in all, that's going to be the end of my rant. We've gone on for half an hour of this spoilery rant. I think this was a bad game. I think the gameplay is quite bad. I didn't even talk about all the different saber styles and stuff there. Yeah, you get different saber styles, like new stances that you can use. But it's like they give you a blaster, which again would fit in with the whole thing if they went down the story route of him turning his back on what the Jedi ideals are in order to be more practical, more pragmatic. He gets a blaster, but it's literally like you don't get to aim it or do anything interesting with it. You just tap Y and you're like, pew, pew, pew. And you do basically nothing with it unless it's against a very weak enemy. And you get like Kylo Ren's like crossblade thing. And it's like, for some reason, that makes the lightsaber heavy. So now it's like the lightsaber's this really heavy thing that does more damage when it hits, which doesn't make any sense at all. And it's obviously just there so it's like you can copy Kylo Ren's fighting style from Force Awakens because it looks cool. And like that's literally it. And then they do this annoying thing where with the saber stances, you can only choose 2 at a time. So it's not like, oh, you can look at each fight like, a Jedi might and be like, okay, now I'm going to use this. Instead, you have to have 2 equipped. So you just end up specializing in 2 and only really give you enough skill points to specialize in 2. So it's like, I ended up using the normal lightsaber and a double-bladed lightsaber like the first game because it basically let you deal with every situation. And I'm sure lots of people will pick 2 of the others. Like, they're all kind of balanced in a fair enough way. But it's like, why not let you choose between them? So in the middle of a fight, you could switch between using a single lightsaber or using 2 lightsabers or using the staff or using a blaster or using your like crossguard thing. It's not even like, oh, you have to modify the lightsaber to prepare for the stances. You'll always have your blaster on your holster. You just don't use it if you don't have that stance equipped. Which again is part of that, like the gamification, actually making it worse rather than making it better. So yeah, I was really disappointed with this game. I genuinely thought it was quite a bad game. Which is a shame. There's obviously lots of lovely art in it, lots of lovely animation, stuff like that. The combat is kind of interesting for a while, but it just gets, everything about it outstays its welcome. Everything about it gets tedious. And the story and the characters I just thought were god-awful, just utterly terrible. Anyway, thanks to EA for providing the code and, the EA Creators Network. I'm a hashtag EA partner. And this is quite a good example of what I was talking about before, that they don't care if you say something bad about the game. They don't care if you don't like the games. They care about you having some, integrity and stuff like that. But like, I don't think this will hurt my relationship with EA that I've said that I don't like Jedi Survivor. Well, if I never cover an EA game, you know what happened. But no, I'm pretty sure that stuff doesn't happen. Oh, and that thing that goes through the barrier. Oh yeah, you get an ability that lets you jump through the barrier for no reason. You want a graphically updated Jedi Academy game? Yeah, I think like they did a much more. I think the Dark Forces series going into Jedi Knight and Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy was a much better Star Wars game. And obviously super dated by today's standards. But I would kind of like them to revisit a lot of the ideas they had there. I think they were a lot more ambitious and they did a lot more sort of fun stuff with those games personally. And the multiplayer was awesome. Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy had such cool multiplayer. It was so good. Doing lightsaber fights in PvP, just absolutely awesome. Or give us a new Masters of Terra Sky, I don't know. Or a new bloody Pod Racer. Pod Racer, I think, is on the Xbox Live Gold thing this month. Check it out, because it's such a good game. I might reinstall it, because I bloody love that game. Anyway, thank you so much to everyone who's been watching. I'm going to stop now, and I will see you, like I said, later today. I don't think I'll be doing any more streaming today. But tomorrow I'll be doing the podcast in the morning, and then I'll be playing some Call of Duty, and I'll be playing some Redfall. So lots of cool things to look forward to tomorrow. I'll see you then. Goodbye.